Okay. All right. Okay, looks like we're getting folks joining. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Paul Bishop. I am coordinating the Journeys to Active Citizenship project here at OCASI, working with our partners at North York Community House and Toronto Metropolitan University. We're so glad that you're able to join us today for what promises to be an insightful and important conversation with two wonderful guests. Before my colleague Seher introduces us to some background on why we're here today, just wanted to address some housekeeping, but first, a land acknowledgement. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territories of the peoples of Turtle Island. The sacred land on which I am situated today has been the site of human activity for 15,000 years. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The territory I'm situated on was subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with Mississaugas of the Credit. Now on to some brief housekeeping. This is a webinar, but we will be in meeting mode, so we ask that you stay muted if you are not speaking. For the first half hour, our two panelists will be presenting on their anti-hate initiatives, followed by a moderated discussion, which I will be facilitating. We'll then have a chance for Q&A from the audience, where I encourage you to either unmute your microphone or type a question into the chat. You're also welcome to type questions into the chat before the Q&A. Just be aware that we will not be able to get to it until the Q&A section at the end. We do have a tight 1 hour today with another meeting starting right after this one. I guess this is a very hot commodity, this Zoom account. So we'll need to end just at 2 p.m. Just letting you know on the off chance my closing remarks are a little concise. Anyway, with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Seher.
Thanks, Paul. I'll keep it really brief. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Welcome. This webinar is part of a project called Journeys to Active Citizenship. We're three project partners: North York Community House, OCASI, and the Democratic Engagement Exchange at Toronto Metropolitan University. We're a 5-year project funded by IRCC, and the project is about co-creating civic engagement curriculum and resources for agencies that serve immigrants and refugees. We say co-creating because we really want to ensure that what we develop throughout the course of this project is really in collaboration with communities and the agencies and staff that serve them. In the first 2 years of our project, we did extensive community consultations about the needs of civic engagement programming in immigrant and refugee serving organizations. And one thing came up over and over, even though we didn't ask for it, and that was the impact of racism and discrimination on immigrants and refugees. And so we've been thinking a lot about that and about how we can address that issue through what we develop, but also broadly through the project in general. And so this webinar came as a result of that. So we have two great speakers. I won't read their bios. I know Paul is going to tell you all about them, but we're so happy to have Firdaus Ali and Maryam Faisal here. And I'm really excited for the conversation, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Seher. I think we'll be turning it over to our two wonderful panelists today. I'll begin by introducing them. So we're joined by Maryam Faisal. Maryam Faisal is the project manager of gender-based violence and anti-hate initiatives at the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians. She recently led a national campaign around the issue of online hate, followed by a release of a toolkit to help increase the digital literacy of social justice agencies. Alongside CASA, she's currently pursuing a postgrad diploma in community and social services management and will be going to graduate school for a master's in social work come September 2022. Prior to CASA, she worked as a mentor for at-risk youth, volunteered as an online a hotline intake coordinator as part of the COVID response, and worked for a women's transitional home. Some causes that she is passionate about include ending gender-based violence, providing youth mentorship, mental health advocacy, and challenging Islamophobia. So welcome, Maryam. We're also joined by Firdaus Ali. Firdaus Ali is an active voice on diversity and inclusion and has led several health and gender equity initiatives for national and provincial organizations, including Heart and Stroke Foundation, Alliance for South Asians AIDS Prevention, Osteoporosis Canada. Firdaus worked as a journalist in Mumbai, India, and is currently employed by the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, CCMW, as a manager of the Digital Anti-Racism Education Project 2, DARE 2. In this role, she aims to educate and empower communities on how they can be allies in effectively countering hate, racism, and Islamophobia. Firdaus believes in blending creative programming and media awareness to open dialogues on important issues like racism, feminism, and gender-based violence. A proud Gandhian, Firdaus lives by the philosophy, you must be the change you want to see in the world. So welcome to our two panelists. I'll turn it over to Maryam to begin speaking to us about CASA's Eradicate Hate campaign. I'll stop sharing my screen so that Maryam, you'll be able to, and I'll turn it over to you, Maryam.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here. Thank you, Paul, for the introduction, and I'll get started. So the project that I will be talking about today is Eradicate Hate, the toolkit to combat online hate, as well as the social media campaign that went alongside it. But first, I want to commemorate National Indigenous Peoples Day, which is today, and just say that today CASA works on colonized Indigenous land, specifically the territories of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. There is no reconciliation under colonization without justice for the crimes that have been committed against Indigenous people. And I encourage you all to please check out native-land.ca to find out which territory you live on. So what is the collaborative to combat online hate to begin with? This project's aim was to build the capacity of advocacy groups through digital literacy to effectively combat online hate, and also provide content support to those who become victims of online hate. The focus area of hate was narrowed down to hate caused by racism and xenophobia. As we know, hate is a very broad topic and there are many causes for it. And so for this project, we did have it narrowed down to racism and xenophobia so that we could accurately and entirely focus on that. To begin, our first phase of the project was the social media campaign, which was launched in October of last year. It was called #EradicateHate, and its main aim was to raise awareness around the pervasive issue of online hate. So it was a 12-week long campaign, and it covered topics from statistics related to online hate to debunking common myths to encouraging reflection activities, and also providing shareable illustrations that folks could share on their WhatsApps, on their own social media platforms, and just to create that conversation and awareness around the issue of online hate. So why was this needed to begin with? Thankfully, a national survey on online hate speech and racism in Canada, which was funded by the Canadian Race Relations Foundation and Abacus Data, was released in January of 2021. And it showed us that 1 in 5 Canadians have experienced some form of online hate. And that is just a very broad stat, right? We also have statistics around racialized Canadians who are 3 times more likely to face online hate. And we know that young Canadians are even more likely to face online hate. And so this issue is pervasive, and it was something that Canadians also viewed as being a major problem in Canada. And so this project aimed to fill that need for it. Here's a quick preview of what the social media campaign looked like. As you can tell, we had some information graphics which went over myth versus fact. We had some things on misinformation, disinformation. We had an amazing, talented illustrator who created these illustrations that we posted. And we also had reflection questions to increase empathetic dialogue and communication between coworkers, friends, and people around you. If you just want to have a conversation around your geopolitical landscape, your own personal approach to anti-racism, these questions provided a starting point to begin those conversations and carry forward. It also would serve as a great training tool for your own organizations, and all of this can be found online, which I'm sure I'll show you guys at the end. Unfortunately, this entire social media campaign showed us exactly why this program was needed to begin with. We had a lot of hate comments all over our social media campaigns. This is just the ones that I've taken screenshots of. I actually deleted most of them. And another thing is that at CASA, we had 4 people moderating the social media platform. So we could sit there and delete these comments or block these people, but not every organization and not every person has that capacity to read all of this information, take it in and have to sit with it. And then also like figure out how to moderate it, how to block people, how to report someone. And so it was like a full circle, right? These comments showed us exactly why this campaign and why this awareness was needed. It really was, at one point, I think I counted like 180 comments on one post. So it was just continuous. Again, it just shows you that this work doesn't stop with me or Firdaus, right? This work has to continue. And that's what this entire presentation is about. And lastly, to culminate and to bring to end the entire social media campaign, we released the toolkit, which is the toolkit to combat online hate. This is a 60-page document with 4 different parts that can help you start your journey to figuring out where you can begin to combat online hate. Not only does it provide you with ways to combat it, but it provides you with context that why does this even matter and why should you be involved with this issue to begin with. So this toolkit aimed to provide more comprehensive insight into online hate, reflection exercises to cultivate better allyship. It even provides threat assessment checklists, bystander intervention, victim support, and also how to configure and perfect your digital security and more. So the aim of this toolkit was to be holistic. Obviously, it's not exhaustive, but it is a great starting point. So I'll just go over the parts really quickly. The first part is education. So honestly, it just like provides you context. So what is hate speech and hate content under Canadian law? What is a summary of hate in Canada? What is the landscape that we are working in? What are the types of online harassment and hate? What is the impact of hate? So a lot of people would ask us, why should we even care about this issue? Like, is this really having like real life repercussions? Are we really seeing a problem that's migrating from online to offline? And the answer is simply yes, it is. We've seen the impact of hate. And like, if you think about it, think of the word cyberbullying. Cyberbullying has been like a problem for a very long time. And the impact of hate just shows you how it's kind of exacerbated from just the issue of cyberbullying to a much bigger and more institutional issue. We also go over ideologies of hate. What is the most prevalent ideologies of hate that we see online? And we go over myth versus fact as content support for victims. We have the action showing how to be an ally, how to do online allyship specifically. We also provide you the 5 Ds of bystander intervention, the online edition. This was a collective effort. And then we also have what if I'm the victim of online hate? So as a bystander, but also as a victim yourself. And we came up with 4 things that you could possibly do if you are the victim of online hate. We also provided you important terms and definitions, and also a starting point on how to train and prepare your organization. So number 3 and 4 included digital security. So we go through each social media platform and we provide you with ways to configure your digital security platforms, whether that's for your own organization or for you personally. We also have YouTube tutorials in tandem with this toolkit that go over each and every digital security preference on your own social media platforms. And then lastly, we have a list of resources from self-care tools to third-party reporting to community organizations that you can reach out to how to go about reporting to law enforcement, which can be a really tricky thing to navigate. So we provide you with all of these resources that we hope will be helpful in your journey to combating online hate. And this question is something that I want to leave you folks with. What is the impact of online hate if it goes unchecked? You can check out the toolkit and it'll detail it exactly, but think about it yourself personally and critically. What is the impact of online hate? Does it really have an impact offline? And what does that look like? And if you would like, you can please check out all of this information and all of these resources on casa.on.ca/eradicate hate. We have the toolkit, we have the infographics, we have the YouTube tutorials, we even have a podcast. So please, I'd love it if you could go check it out and use it in your own organizations. This toolkit, this information was created for you and for your own personal and your collective benefits. So I would love it if you could go check it out. Thank you so much.
Maryam, thank you so much for sharing that with us. What a wonderful presentation. I just really appreciate it. I know for myself, and I imagine for so many people on this call, online hate is something that is witnessed. It can be difficult to know kind of where to begin, right? So to have a toolkit with such a methodical approach, right? Like going from education, action, protecting digital security, right? There's so many elements of it that you so kind of methodically and sort of understandably break down, which really lends itself well to really taking action against this. So I thoroughly enjoyed that, and so glad you were able to share that with us. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to Firdaus Ali now. Firdaus from the Canadian Council of Muslim Women. Firdaus, take it away.
Unmute.
There, Firdaus, there you go.
Thank you, Paul. And Maryam, I think that was an excellent presentation. And I'd like to add that Maryam and I have worked together. So, I think that these projects really are successful when there's a collaboration behind it and our communities come together. So, as we do our workshops, we also want to include the toolkit that Maryam spoke about in future workshops. So thank you for that, Maryam. That was amazing. And I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Are you able to see that?
Yep, that's good.
So I'm an old gal. I come from the days when typewriters were there. I used to be a journalist in Bombay, as Paul mentioned, and really seeing the savviness of the online world has me amazed. And we will talk about how it has both positive and negative connotations. So just a little bit, I am a staff with the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, CCMW as it's known. It's perhaps one of the oldest organizations, so 40 years old. This is the year we celebrate and mark 40 years. And really it came out from a space of, faith-based women who wanted to find a space for themselves within their own communities and outside of it. So we had the wonderful late Dr. Lila Falman, who kind of came forward from Winnipeg, Manitoba. And she said that, we need this space. We need to talk about issues that are concerning us, and we need to promote our identities with the larger communities. So it was formed 40 years ago, and we really worked towards equity, equality, and empowerment of Canadian Muslim women girls, as well as non-binary people. And we have 16 chapters across Canada, so really a national organization, and we advocate on all issues that are affecting and impacting women, not just Muslim women, but racialized women and women across Canada. As you know, CCMW does a lot of work around advocacy against, for example, against Bill 21. We have gender-based violence projects underway, but really the heart of everything is really the surge in Islamophobia that we are seeing, not only in Canada, but I think globally. I come from India, and I left India, which was secular, which was progressive, where many faith-based communities lived together in harmony. We did have our ups and downs, but today's India is on fire. It's kind of burning, where the Muslim minority is kind of seen as a second-class citizen. And you'll find daily, as you open the Indian newspapers, you'll find lynchings, a lot of atrocities, homes being bulldozed against young girls who are speaking out against the racial and the other discriminations that are going on. So we did see in Canada itself, I migrated in 1996 thinking that Canada is this land of peace, land of harmony, and the colonial violence that we have seen against our own Indigenous peoples have kind of woken us up to say there is a lot going on which we are sometimes not aware of. So what started for the Muslim community with the 2017 attack on the Quebec mosque, which left 6 Muslim brothers dead, was soon followed by so many other attacks. I've just put a few here where Muhammad Aslam Zafiz, who was a volunteer in a Toronto mosque, was killed. Then we had the beautiful Afzal family in London, who was killed by an act of terror last year. I think it was June 6th. And so we continue to see, and we do have a chapter in Edmonton, and the women there tell me that daily attacks on racialized, visible Muslim women continue. So which is why, as Maryam said, hate is happening in our own communities, and we must do something about it. So this was one of the reasons why our project came into being. Similar to what Maryam said, we had glaring stats from the Race Relations Canada, which said 1 in 5 Canadians have experienced some form of racism. And also between 2012 and 2015, there was a whopping 253% surge in hate crimes against Muslims. And of course, whatever happens offline is also translated to our online communities. They kind of complement each other. So the glaring stats, which shows that 73% of women are abused online, and the most impacted are women aged 18 to 24. So knowing this, CCMW really could not keep quiet about it. So we did apply to the Government of Canada for a project called Digital Anti-Racism Education. And we had a phase 1 and a phase 2, which I will talk about. Just very quickly, I'm sure you are all familiar with Statistics Canada released this maybe a few months ago, but the increase in hate crimes surged by 37% over the previous year. And as you know, police reported hate crimes. There are many that go unreported. I think the data shows that it's about 75% of crime and hate crime, especially that go unreported. So if you do the math, you can know how these numbers are really glaring and alarming. What is also alarming is that the increase was mostly due to incidents targeting race or ethnicity. So really as well as religious minorities are impacted. So here it is. So, from the last year to this year, 62% of all police reported hate crimes were motivated by race or ethnicity and 20% by religion. And if you see on the left-hand side, you have our Black communities, our East Asian communities, our South Asian communities, and our Arab communities really at very high risk of police reported hate crime. And when we talk about religious minorities, it is our Jewish and our Muslim communities, which we keep on hearing. There's so many attacks, so much vandalism that we must stand up against it. Just among the provinces that are really high hit by the hate attacks, is the number 1 is of course Ontario, sadly so. Then we also have BC, Quebec, and Alberta. When we talk about online hate, we must talk about what is the ideology that really brings them together. So again, our statistics show that there are about 300 groups or more only in Canada that kind of, they have different names, but they have one ideology where they believe themselves to be of a common race, the white race, and they believe that they are superior or supreme over others. So this is the dangerous white extremism, or that ideology that, influence especially our youth. If you see the attacks that have happened recently, whether they are in the US, whether they are in Canada or globally, I would say even in India, when I look at the tweets, the vicious attacks, the violence that I see in the words themselves, it is with 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds telling us that, this is the most vulnerable space, the digital space. It has an absolute far reach, and we must do something about it, where our youth are not influenced by this hate ideology that is surging online and transcending to violent actions offline. Quickly, just to let you know that there is a pyramid of hate, I always give the example of India, which is where I came from, where, when the hate starts, for us, it started in 2007, where, you have fundamentalist people either ruling the country or, and so it starts with biases. So, slight biases, microaggressions, and then it starts with bullying or, slighting, dehumanizing, and then it becomes systemic. And that is the blue phase is very dangerous, where you can really go to the red phase, to the genocide very quickly. We have seen that happen in India in like 7 years or 8 years, where we slipped from the pink phase, where the biases against Muslims grew, against other minorities grew, and now it is systemic. Now you have the local governments who are bulldozing houses of people that speak up, who are attacking journalists, who are attacking secular people, and really genocide, where Muslims are being lynched for simply being Muslims, simply for their own identities. So really to say that, we must be cognizant about this pyramid. When we see the pink slipping to the green, that's when we really need to take action. I just want to say that, Canada is a signatory on the Council of Europe's policy on cyber hate. So we do talk about cyber hate and online hate, but really what does it mean? So I'm just going to read it out. It is an oral, written, audiovisual expressions and other forms of expression, including the electronic media, inciting to hatred, discrimination, or violence against racial, ethnic, national, or religious groups, or against the members on the grounds that they belong to such a group. So, we do speak about the social media space that has become a dangerous space. But I also talk about our television. Sometimes when you are tuned into a particular channel or you're using, a particular network, that rhetoric or that narrative that is being spewed over and over again, that is the mechanism that they use so that people start believing in that misinformation or disinformation. And that again is really, really dangerous. I just want to say that, online hate impacts everybody. It impacts youth, it impacts women. But I think that, when we add discriminations that exist or the intersections. So if someone is impacted by Islamophobia or ableism or ageism, I think then that impact of online hate really amplifies to different levels. And I think that I focus on women because CCMW is a women's based organization, but women who face multiple discriminations such as homophobia, transphobia, etc., are at more risk when it comes to online hate. And the data again shows us that women aged 18 to 24 are really at highest risk for being trolled, abused, to be stalked online. And we have seen that these have again transcended, sadly, into violent acts of expression. So despite all these things happening on our online worlds, we have so many new platforms, so many new apps, almost one coming in every month, something new. But the reality is that these apps and they kind of take us to a different world, which can be really, you can have a positive experience, but many that I have spoken to, including my age group or the younger ones, really feel threatened on the digital space. They have been trolled, they have been abused, and despite them complaining to the social media platforms, really sometimes nothing has been done about it. I cite an example of Rana Ayub, who is a prominent journalist from India. She was much later than my time, but really when she talks about a secular India and the hate against Muslims, she is trolled. There is revenge porn. You will find pornographic images of her, which were kind of put together to manipulate and to silence her. She gets daily so many threats. And really when she talks about the social media experience, and she says, even despite so many complaints, she has to block them herself. She has to advocate herself for her own safety, which is really a sad thing. So seeing all these, the glaring issues that we are facing today, both offline and online, our project was called Digital Anti-Racism Education. This is our website, daretobeaware.ca. As you know, we are daring to challenge our world, daring to challenge ourselves with the biases and the prejudices sometimes that we sadly hold. And this is our website, which is housing some wonderful tools and resources around Islamophobia, hate, and racism. So we have two modules, e-learning modules that we created in phase one. One is a broader anti-racism one-on-one. So, if you have newcomer communities, youth communities who really want to know more about what does anti-racism look like, or what does racism look like in Canada, I kind of would like them to take this course. It is both in French and English. And we also had developed the Countering Cyber Hate one-on-one, which again talks about how do you keep our online spaces safe? What does online extremism look like on the online space, and how do you counter it? We also had a very, very savvy social media campaign. It was called Dare to Be Aware. Again, this was part of phase one. Wonderful illustrations done by the artist Hannah Shafi, who's also now part of our staff. But we spoke about the different forms of racism or discrimination that existed that exists in our world. So it could be in the employment world, it could be in our workplace, it could be in our faith-based institutions. So these are just, again, in French and English. And we really want, that Islamophobia does not stand out on its own. Online hate does not stand on its own. We have to embrace the other discriminations that are going on. So we embrace our indigenous people and the colonial violence that has been done against them, to say that we are fighting this in one voice. I think that digital stories too have really, really a very good power. So we invited people to share their lived experiences. And when you read these stories, which are on our website, you will find that, there is so much discrimination happening to our women, to our youth, to our older adults, that we simply cannot stay silent about it. So just in a nutshell, that, what makes the DARE, so we had again a funding for DARE phase 2. Just as Maryam showed us, we collected all the hate that we got from our social media campaign, a lot of trolling, a lot of hate, and we collected it and we showed it to our funder to say that, a lot of work still needs to be done. And we got funding for DARE Phase 2. And what makes DARE Phase 2 a little different is that the focus was, of course, on online hate, but also on the surging Islamophobia and how they intersect. So we also talked about the intersections of racism, Islamophobia, and countering cyber hate, and how these impact our most vulnerable communities, which are our Black community, our Indigenous communities, our queer communities, our French-speaking communities, and communities living with diverse abilities. So we have 2 modules, again, 2 workshops that we've done, countering cyber hate, and the other one is the anti-Islamophobia. We also developed a social media campaign, which is called Hate to Healing. And just like the words say, there is a lot of healing that needs to happen after one encounters hate. So we will talk about this, but again, we have trained about 4,000 participants across Canada on the 2 modules or the 2 workshops. And I can tell you that I have attended every workshop, and every workshop has been so empowering. One of them, we had a white woman come up after the 2 hours of anti-Islamophobia, and she said that, I have been Islamophobic. I was Islamophobic to a woman who was traveling in the train. I just stared at her. This was after 9/11, and I am so sorry. So, these workshops like these are really intense, but we want, the change in behavior, change in mindset, and we hope that we have made a difference to a certain level. And the Hate to Healing campaign, of course, is on our website, 15 videos, so French and English, but really, really heart-wrenching experiences of women and girls who have faced hate attacks and who have faced Islamophobia, but really more about how their resiliency has shown, how they have risen above the hate to build community for themselves and for others. So I'll quickly go through, not a lot, but these workshops, this was a piece that they told us that, that we were happy to learn about the misrepresentation of Muslims and what we can do about it, the hate groups that exist, the anti-hate legislations, and the 5 Ds that Maryam spoke about. They also spoke about, they want to use strategies to counter hate. And, we want to have strong privacy settings for our social media, just so that we can be safe and we can keep our community safe, and to have stronger regulations to curb online hate. So just to do a little sales pitch, that although the project ended in March, as our commitment to anti-racism work, CCMW does continue to do these workshops. We have one tomorrow with United Way. So, we as we are called upon by communities, we are there to do these workshops and to educate and empower and to learn with all of them. This is our campaign that I spoke about, Hate to Healing. We also had wonderful illustrations where key quotes were used. So why do we discard our fight for justice when the person is queer? So this was a queer person, Sumaya, who came out, spoke about their story of being queer and being a Muslim. We had Gania talk about, Black Muslim women being targeted in Edmonton. And then there was a young girl called Noreen from Montreal who said, I thought the Islamophobia I was experiencing in elementary and high school had something to do with me. That meant I had to change. So she carried that blame throughout her elementary and high school life. So I'd like to end. So this project was funded by the Government of Canada. Big thank you to them. And this is our wonderful social media channels. Do engage, because we have to fight this fight in one voice. Those are our websites. And I'm not going to play this, Paul. I don't think we have the time, but I encourage anybody who really wants to know what a lived experience of a Muslim person facing online hate. I just want to end with Noor's story. I may not play it, but Noor was attacked on a Sky train in Vancouver. She was wearing her hijab and a red coat. Suddenly someone found her to be a target, victimized her, and she was so traumatized. So she went online. She thought that the online community is her safe community. And she spoke about her experience with the attack, and she was sadly trolled and abused and re-victimized. And she was shocked to learn that there is so much abuse happening on the online space as well. So I kind of urge you all after this session today, if you have the time, to really watch Noor and the other stories that live on our daretobeaware.ca website. So I'd just like to thank all of you for listening so patiently, and over to you again, Paul. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Firdaus. And I invite you to share the link to that video in the chat if you'd like, so that people can take a look. And I so appreciated so many elements of what you spoke about. Really appreciated how you grounded it in some context at the beginning, the context of Islamophobia and racism, to remind us of really what's at stake, right? As you know, and I think it tied in with the way Maryam ended her presentation around what's at stake if we let online hate go ignored. And I think some of the examples you gave at the beginning of that presentation sort of gave us part of the answer. So I think that's so important to remind us of what's at stake here, and a wonderful project, again, similar to CASA's, giving people really tangible tools to combat something which, you know, a lot of folks witness, particularly a lot of younger people witness, but don't feel as though they necessarily have the tools in hand to take a stand against it. So wonderful to have that. In particular, I really enjoyed the intersectional lens that you spoke about, speaking about the impact of online hate on queer communities, you know, on trans communities, on Indigenous communities, right? So looking at it from so many different angles. So wonderful to have you to share that, Firdaus. I really appreciate it. So I think we will be moving on to the sort of discussion portion of our webinar today, and we'll begin with a moderated discussion where I'll be posing some questions to our two panelists. We'll follow that up with some Q&A from the audience. You're welcome to, as I'm speaking, as we're doing the moderated discussion, to type questions into the chat if you like. We won't be able to get to them until that section of the conversation. But you know, if you want to put them in the chat now, you're more than welcome to. Okay, so I wanted to start by linking us back to something that Seher was mentioning earlier on in our conversation today. You know, at Journeys to Active Citizenship, we did a lot of consultations with individuals, with organizations over the past couple of years, talking about what are some of the barriers that people face to being involved, to being engaged in their community. Right. And of course, one thing that came up over and over again was racism and discrimination, particularly online. This is something that we heard about time and time again. Anecdotally, you know, people were just less willing to get involved in challenging conversations online for fear of what kind of harassment and so forth it would generate. So I guess I'd like to turn it over to you. How do you see online hate as limiting people's, you know, willingness to be civically engaged, to be involved in conversations, whether online or offline? In your experience working with folks, what have you seen as examples of how online hate can limit civic engagement?
Did you want me to answer that, Paul?
Sure. I'll turn it over to both of you, but if you're welcome to start off for this. Yeah.
Okay, or Maryam, I have spoken enough. I think maybe Maryam should go and then I can answer that.
No, please go ahead. It's okay.
So Paul, my view is that, you know, the online space can be a wonderful space if, you know, a great learning experience. There's so much going on in the online space that can be really tools, not only for civic engagement, but for education, for awareness. But sadly, when that same space, you know, gets, I would say there's so much going on where the social media companies are not aware that, you know, there's misinformation floating, there's disinformation, there's harm, there's hate. And, you know, when all this goes unchecked, then the people that are on this online space really feel threatened, they feel vulnerable. I talk about my own organization, CCMW, where we have a diverse age of women, so younger women and older, and women who are maybe 50 plus, like myself, you know, when they've just put a simple post, let's say about an attack that has happened, for example, like on the Afzal family, they get trolled for, you know, speaking out for, you know, go back to your country, this is your problem, you brought it upon yourselves. And really, they don't have the tools or the confidence sometimes to counter these, you know, and that kind of shakes them up to say, I want to reject, I want to kind of be off the online space. So I have had at least 4 women who are from our chapters who have signed off from the social media and really are not engaged with it in any way. So, you know, when we have campaigns like the Hate to Healing, where we want them to promote the campaign or to be part of it, sadly, we don't see their voices, we don't hear them just because they have signed off from this online space. So I feel that, you know, instead of relying on the social media company to keep it safe, let's take that ownership in our own hands. Let's see what we can do, like Maryam's project, like CASA's project. These are really great tools where we can learn, we can, you know, educate our own communities, or begin with our families. Like if you have an older adult at home, maybe share those learnings with them to say, yes, you're using Facebook, but these are the settings that can keep you safe. These are the settings that you can block a hater. These are the settings that you can report, right? Like, so I'm going to end there, but let's take that ownership in our own hands, because nobody's coming to our help unless we do.
Thank you for those. I just wanted to reiterate what you said about how women specifically are the target of, the backlash that they face. And a lot of, in our focus groups that we had for our project, we had a lot of women like tell us about how one woman was like, I had to stop using Twitter entirely. She's like, I would just comment on like the geopolitical landscape around me, and the amount of hate I would get on that one like tweet or that one post, like entirely like put me off social media. I didn't want to post anymore. And so I think that it's interesting to see, because a voice that was critically engaging with the political landscape around her was stifled because of that hate. And so whatever civic engagement that she was doing, whatever kind of advice or criticism she was doing of the political landscape around her was stifled. Like no one wanted to hear it. And so she was like, there's no point in me posting anything, right? It's not worth the backlash. It's not worth it if I have to like take care of my own mental health after I post something. So is there even any point in like civically engaging if like the result is just going to be more backlash, and nothing is protecting her from that? And of course, like taking like, empowering yourself and taking like, learning those tools is very necessary, but it's also sometimes you're just like, is it even worth it to, go to the trouble of like blocking? Like I said, like not everyone has the capacity to sit there and like, go through comments and like bear like the barrage of comments, right? Like it's not, we were four, like I said, we were 4 people. We were there sitting there and deleting comments, but it's not always that easy. But yeah, unfortunately it does limit civic engagement. It does stop people from just conversing and having like an opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a sort of discouraging, but message obviously, but the fact that these programs exist to give people those resources to combat it is so reassuring to know that those exist, but so important to remember, really what the consequences of it are, right? That people, particularly racialized people, marginalized voices, the people that for whom a lot is at stake, are being left out of the conversation because of their concerns about being trolled, about being harassed, and so forth. So all the more need for resources like the ones that you've provided. I wanted to switch it over to a more sort of general conversation, and I was reading through. I think Maryam, you mentioned the Canadian Race Relations Foundation report. I believe it was Maryam that mentioned that. One thing that really struck me is that seeing that racialized people are not only more likely to experience explicitly racist abuse online, but also other forms of abuse which sort of appear unrelated to race, sexist abuse, homophobic abuse, and so forth. That racialized folks, particularly racialized women, 2 times more likely to experience homophobic or sexist abuse. So it's troubling, right? What is really going on here? Why do you think this is the case that people, racialized folks, are encountering abuse that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with race? What's kind of at play here?
I don't know. Do you want me to go? I can.
Sure, please.
Okay, yeah. I think what was, I want to go back to what Firdaus said in her presentation about the intersectional piece. It's added marginalization, right? It's like layers of marginalization. And so if, for example, if a Black person is being targeted, but then they're also a woman, that's an added level of marginalization. So they will throw the racial slurs, but then they'll also throw like misogynistic and sexist slurs as well towards them, because it's about how can I continue to compound that hatred, and like finding those like layers of the way that we work through intersectional lens, but also people who hate work through that same lens, because they're like, we see these added layers of marginalization and we can target each and every one of them. And so when you're already targeted for being Indigenous or for being Black, for being Asian, and then they find out that there's other layers to your, your identity, that are you trans, are you queer, are you woman, are you Muslim, are you a Black Muslim woman? We've seen this in Edmonton, like Black Muslim women were explicit targets of hate, and it was because they were both visibly Black and visibly Muslim. And so those added layers of marginalization just compounded that hatred, right? So I think that's definitely one of the big reasons that racialized folks face it at a much more amplified level. For those to you.
Yes, Maryam, that's a great point. But Paul, I'd like to add that, most of this hate kind of stems from two things. One is ignorance and one is fear. I would say it's ignorance of the communities that are coming in that you don't know or you really don't want to know. So we dress differently, we eat differently, maybe we behave differently, we have a different accent. But we're really proud about that identity, and we don't want to change ourselves, and maybe that is something that is not acceptable to those who are ruling with that white thumb. The second is also the fear, right? Like the fear, we talk about the attacks that have happened on racialized communities, and the white men or women perpetrating these attacks are really scared, and they kind of talk about the replacement theory, which really a lot of white right-wing extremist groups talk about, that they will be replaced. So they have to kind of do things, whether it's violent or not, to keep their space, to keep their hold in the world. So I think that, as we do our education and as we do our trainings and as we share these learnings with our communities, the two things that we really need to eradicate are the ignorance. So let's, we are not here to change the world. I'm a Muslim woman. I have so many other identities besides just my religion, right? Like I'm a mom, I'm a grandmother now. I used to be a journalist. So many intersections to me. But I think that, when you see a brown face there, that's the only thing maybe that stands out. If you see an Indian accent, that's the thing that you don't want to see or hear. So I would say that, I truly believe that this education needs to start at a young age. Sometimes when you're teaching people my age or older, they are really finding it difficult to unlearn racism because that's what they've been taught. That's the lifestyle, that's the mindset that they have developed for 50 plus years. But if we start this education in school, in high schools, where we teach them what anti-Semitism is, what anti-Islamophobia is, and really not what these issues are, but how they can stand up. If they see someone being bullied just because of who that person or who that student is, maybe a South Asian, maybe a newcomer, maybe you're a refugee, really we need to stand up, so if we teach this to our young students, there is no unlearning racism. Then it is that you are having that mindset, you are following that ideology, and that is really, really important to me. And Paul, to your earlier question, something that came to mind is, to add to the vulnerabilities, I think that, many newcomers and refugees may be on this call today, but really come from, trauma, they come from war. And when you put them on an online space, again, which is unsafe, or even a physical space, where they've been attacked. I am part of the Indian embassy where this young student was recently killed for just coming out of the subway. A lot of our international students are really facing, abuse, whether it's online or offline. So that's where the intersections come in, where we are these marginalized communities, we are a refugee. In one of our anti-Islamophobia workshop, we talk about how refugees are seen as these grabbers and takers, and, refugees from X country are better from Y country. So, that internalized racism that we have must be eliminated with a lot of good learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate, again, both of you bringing up the intersectional lens, because what I think so often the instances of racism that are witnessed, right, race is often a motivating factor, even if the language that's being used is not necessarily racist itself. It can be so obvious, right, that this person might not be using this kind of sexist or transphobic or homophobic language if the person wasn't themselves racialized, right? And those can be really challenging, I think, situations, because it can be really difficult to call out racism when it's clear that race is the motivating factor, but racism is not necessarily being, racist language is not actually being used, right? So those can be really, really challenging conversations. And Firdaus, I really also appreciated your focus on starting this education early, right? Because so many conversations that young people are having, so much of their lives are online, right? And if we're not focusing on the online component of racism, we're 10 years behind the conversation, right? So, to both of you, I think that these projects are just absolutely crucial. I'm just mindful of time. I'm just seeing it's 1:50, and I wanted to give participants a chance to chime in with questions. I did mention at the start of the call, if you wanted to unmute yourself, you can, but I'm just realizing, just so people aren't sort of talking over each other, because we do have quite a large group today. If you wanted to just type in questions to the chat, that I'm sure our panelists would be happy to take, I invite you to go ahead and type your questions into the chat right now. And I'm going to share my screen so that you can also see just some ways of staying connected with my and Sahir's program, Journeys to Active Citizenship. So we should be able to see that screen now. So this is just ways you can stay connected while you're typing your questions into the chat. I invite you to take a look and see ways that you can stay engaged with our programs. And I know Maryam and Firdaus have also shared their emails and contact information in the chat as well. So we do have a Twitter handle, a website, and then settlenet.org, which some of you may be already on. It's the online community of practice for the refugee and immigrant serving sector. So feel free to join our group there. I do see a question that's come in from Jad asking, are there any advocacy efforts and government relations that your organizations are doing on this topic?
So I can just answer that, we are, our advocacy is really our trainings. That's how we're advocating for change, by doing these training workshops that are mostly free of cost to the community. But we advocate on different things. So we have gender-based violence projects. So we advocate on behalf of, many gender-based issues that cause violence and cause, things to happen. So I would say that, engage with the organization. My email is there. And the best way to advocate is really be in that space, so, don't wait for, I always say, don't wait for the others to come. You need to be there. You need to fight that fight because nobody's fighting it for you. I truly believe in that. So you have wonderful organizations like CASA, CCMW, NCCM. They have different, things that they advocate for depending on the time. So right now there's the online hate legislation that really we all must advocate for. It did not get passed because of the elections, but really we need to get this passed. If you're talking about online hate and you do not have a legislation that tells us, tells the police, the justice system as to who they can charge and who they cannot, it's kind of a big gap. So I would say this is one of the biggest things that you can advocate for today.
Yeah, I think similarly, CASA does work with, we have a group called the Anti-Hate Community Leaders Group. CCMW is also part of the Anti-Hate Community Leaders Group. We are, and I believe Canadian Arab Institute is also part of it. And we are working with, the Canadian Anti-Hate Network is a huge resource for all of us. And they work directly with government legislators and to push them to, pass legislation that is necessary and important. Like Firdaus mentioned, the online hate legislation that was halted because of the election, that is currently being worked on. I believe the Canadian Anti-Hate Network is also launching a toolkit for the education sector for combating hate in that space as well, and working with legislators around regulations for social media companies as well. So yes, but obviously there's always work to be done, and do reach out if you have ways to brainstorm or ways if you want to collaborate or work on this initiative more on the legislative side. It would be great, and I think very necessary.
Thank you for those answers. Oh, sorry, did I cut you off for this?
No, I'm just saying the YWCA's Block Hate campaign was absolutely amazing. So kudos.
Sorry, she wouldn't mind staying muted. Thank you so much. Okay, wonderful. We got some great questions coming in. A question here. How can we promote the importance of this topic to people who are not necessarily members of a marginalized or racialized? It says radicalized, maybe racialized, marginalized or racialized group. In other words, how do you answer the why should I care question?
Maryam, you go.
I think that was the biggest thing as well for this project, was the why should I care part, was the why would anyone care about online hate if they are not being impacted by it. And I think the biggest, two things. The first thing is that the impact of online hate is a pervasive issue. So it impacts Canadian society as a whole. It's not just an issue for marginalized folks. If you actually look through the history of hate in Canada, you'd see that it's not just about marginalized folks. It's about, for example, as we mentioned, cyberbullying, right? So it's not only about you can bring the issue to be something close to them. So for example, if they have kids, you can say, oh, well, the issue of cyberbullying is very pervasive for youth, for young kids, for people who are online a lot. And we know youth are online a lot, especially during the pandemic. And if you start the conversation from something that is more familiar to them, you can then escalate it to something that might be a bit more foreign to them. And you can also bring in examples of these issues about how we see hate incidents happening outside that are a result of online issues, and that this issue changes the norms of a society. If you are exposed to slurs or racial or opinions that are very, very discriminatory and racist, those become normal in society if they are not unchecked. And so do you want to live in a place or in a world where people are not allowed to just exist or be themselves? Is that something that is okay? And the impact of online hate is, we've seen, like, from murders being live streamed on Facebook to all of these other like massive issues that are not limited to just marginalized folks. We've especially in the States, we've seen like gun violence take a huge like toll on like the entire country. And so these issues don't stop at marginalized people. Like youth are being caught in the crossfire. And so when you make it more personal to them, you can then discuss like the bigger issues of marginalization and racism, and show that why it's now a more collective issue and a systemic issue.
I'm just going to add to what Maryam says, is that the biggest reason why hate still lives in our world today is because we are all fighting this fight in our own silos. We are not fighting this together. So Islamophobia is a fight that only Muslims fight, and Semitism is a fight that only the Jewish people have to fight. And I think that's where the problem lies, right? Like, we really do not believe in allyship. We talk about it, we say, yes, it's great to be allies, but it is our individual fights. That's how we see it, which is why hate is spreading and it's surging, and many people are becoming so daring to take that hate to a different level of violence, both offline and online. But we have also seen that when we do advocacy together, when we kind of work together as a community, we have seen wonderful change happen. And why can't we apply that to the hate that we are seeing today, right? Like that allyship where we are talking and we are fighting for our indigenous peoples. Like that's one of the biggest allyship I see, where we can, make that change happen against the colonial violence that we have seen. Like I did mention, I migrated from India, thought Canada is the most peaceful, country. And then when I saw that the violence that has been unleashed against the indigenous people, so let's not leave it to that community or to them to fight. Let's make it our fight. I just want to end with that. And I also, there's one very, very good quote or a saying, I don't know if it was by Einstein or somebody else, that said that the world is going to end not by the haters, but by the people who stay silent about it. So, the haters are doing their job, they're wonderful at it, but it is us who are kind of in the shell. We are silent. It's their fight. It's someone else's fight. And that's why, we are seeing what we are seeing today.
Thank you, Firdaus. Such a crucial and important point to end on. I'm just mindful of the time and seeing we're right at 1:59 here. So I'm sure there's some of you that were not able to get their questions into the chat, but I invite you to continue the conversation, whether it's on our SettleNet group or on Twitter or with Maryam Firdaus directly. I want to thank the two of you, both you, Firdaus, and Maryam, so much for joining us today. I want to thank you so profoundly. Just such crucial conversations, and I certainly learned a lot and got a lot from it, and I'm sure so many members of the group did today. Just very difficult conversations, difficult topics, but so necessary given how much of our civic conversation is happening online, and how important it is that these conversations become healthier, and that people engaging in them can feel safe and equipped to stand up to this kind of abuse. So thank you so much again. I just really appreciate you joining us today, and I hope we can continue the conversation both with the panelists and with our attendees today. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for your wonderful questions and comments today. It was great to be joined with you today. So we have made a recording of this, so I'll be sharing a follow-up message with everyone after. But until then, thank you so much, and wishing you a wonderful day. And thanks again to our wonderful panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, for your amazing work, for
thank you,
staying
Paul.
so engaged with us with all the slide deck, and for Seher Thank you to all. And I always say, let's end with a commitment. Wherever I've gone, whenever we've done workshops, let's not just end this conversation. Let's end with a commitment. So a small thing maybe that you will do after today's session with your family or your friend. It could just be changing your setting on your phone or your friend's phone or your child's phone. Really, let's keep ourselves safe and our communities. So adios to all of you. And thank you so much for having me and Maryam on this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
And wishing you all a great day. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.